What really happened? The Springfield Three. After the shocking disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, Springfield was left in fear and confusion. Despite massive searches, no evidence was found. Rumors spread, theories multiplied, and suspects came into the spotlight, including a convicted killer who claimed to know the truth. For decades, families have begged for answers, investigators have chased dead ends, and the city has lived under the shadow of this haunting case. In this second part, we dive deeper into the theories, the suspects, and the chilling legacy of one of America's most enduring mysteries, the Springfield Three. In the days following the disappearance, Springfield police faced a nightmare scenario. They had no crime scene, no suspects, and no timeline that made sense. Still, they launched an extensive search. Volunteers, officers, and even the FBI combed through fields, rivers, and wooded areas surrounding the city. Helicopters circled overhead. Search dogs sniffed for any trace of the missing women. Yet despite the massive effort, there was nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no bodies. Detectives were baffled. It was as if Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy had simply evaporated. As days turned into weeks, speculation grew. Investigators considered several possibilities. Abduction by someone they knew. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting the women may have opened the door willingly. A random break-in gone wrong. Perhaps they interrupted a burglar who decided to silence them. A planned kidnapping. Could someone have specifically targeted the three women, knowing their routines? Each theory carried weight, but none fit perfectly. Detectives kept running into dead ends. Over time, several names emerged in connection to the case. One of the most notorious was Robert Craig Cox, a convicted kidnapper and suspected murderer who had lived in Springfield at the time. Years later, Cox would claim that he knew the Springfield Three were dead and that their bodies would never be found. But when pressed, he refused to give details, leaving investigators to wonder if he was telling the truth or simply taunting them. Other suspects included local criminals and men connected to Susie's past relationships. Each lead seemed promising at first, but one by one, they collapsed under scrutiny. No charges were ever filed. As the case dragged on, national attention grew. News crews arrived in Springfield, filming outside the Levitt home, interviewing neighbors and replaying every small development. The missing women's faces appeared on America's Most Wanted, giving the case nationwide exposure. For the families, the attention was bittersweet. They hoped the coverage would bring tips, maybe even answers. But as weeks turned into months, the media coverage faded and the mystery remained unsolved. In the first weeks after the disappearance, Springfield transformed into a city under siege. Police, FBI agents, and volunteers scoured every possible lead. The surrounding countryside was combed by search parties. Fields, wooded areas, lakes, and abandoned properties were all checked repeatedly. Helicopters hovered overhead, using infrared cameras to search for heat signatures in the dense woods. Police dogs were brought in, sniffing through backyards and drainage ditches. Divers explored ponds and rivers, hoping to find even the smallest trace. Hundreds of volunteers joined in, forming human chains across fields and forests. Residents who had never been involved in police work before found themselves looking for clues in the grass, peering into old barns, or knocking on neighbors' doors. But despite the scale of the search, there was nothing. Not a single piece of clothing, no personal belongings, no sign of struggle in the areas searched. It was as if the women had been swallowed whole by the night. With the physical evidence scarce, investigators turned to theories. Each possibility seemed chilling, yet none could be proven. First theory: abduction by someone they knew. The lack of forced entry suggested the women had opened the door voluntarily. Perhaps it was a friend, a neighbor, or someone they trusted. This theory unsettled the community most, because if true, it meant the danger could have come from within their own circle. Second theory: a random intruder. Others believed the women had been targeted at random, possibly by someone who followed them home from the graduation parties. This could explain the suddenness of the disappearance. Yet without forced entry or noise reported by neighbors, the theory felt incomplete. Third theory: interrupted burglary. One idea was that a burglar had broken in expecting an empty house. When confronted by the women, the thief might have panicked and decided to silence them. But again, valuables were untouched. The purses remained. Jewelry was still in place. Nothing supported this theory. Fourth theory: a planned kidnapping. Some investigators leaned toward the possibility that the disappearance was carefully planned. If so, the perpetrator may have stalked the women for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. This would explain the clean removal of 3 people without a trace. But who could organize such a crime, and why? Each theory generated a flurry of activity: interviews, tips, leads. Yet every path led nowhere. The phone lines at police headquarters rang constantly with calls from psychics, well-meaning citizens, and people claiming to have seen the women in other states. Detectives followed up on every lead, but the results were always the same: no evidence, no sightings, no resolution. The Springfield Three had simply vanished into an impossible silence. As the weeks turned into months, investigators struggled with the fact that there was no crime scene, no bodies, and no physical evidence. But suspicion naturally began to fall on certain individuals. Springfield police, desperate for answers, looked closely at people from the women's pasts and at those whose behavior raised red flags. One name stood out more than any other: Robert Craig Cox. Cox was a convicted kidnapper and suspected murderer. In 1978, he had been arrested for brutally attacking a woman in Florida. He was later connected to the murder of a 19-year-old woman, Sharon Zellers. Although he was convicted, that verdict was overturned on appeal, and Cox eventually walked free. By 1992, he was living in Springfield, Missouri, working as a utility worker and at times even performing military training exercises in the area. Investigators couldn't ignore the chilling coincidence of his presence in the city at the time the Springfield Three vanished. Years later, in interviews from prison on unrelated charges, Cox made a series of disturbing claims. He told journalists that he knew the Springfield Three were dead. When pressed for details, he refused to elaborate, smugly saying that the case would never be solved and that their bodies would never be recovered. Some believed Cox was taunting authorities, enjoying the attention. Others feared he truly held the answers but would never reveal them. To this day, many in Springfield remain convinced that Cox knows far more than he ever admitted. While Cox grabbed headlines, he wasn't the only suspect. Police also looked into Susie's ex-boyfriend and some of his acquaintances. There were rumors of conflicts, of arguments that might have turned dangerous. Investigators examined whether personal relationships could have played a role. Another lead involved a suspicious van seen near the Levitt home in the early hours of June 7th. Witnesses described it as an older model Dodge or Chevy, light in color. Some believed the women might have been forced into it. But despite nationwide searches, the vehicle was never located. Detectives also considered known criminals in the region, men with violent histories, transient workers, or individuals tied to drug activity. Each was interviewed, some even polygraphed. Yet none produced enough evidence to move the case forward. The frustrating truth for investigators was that every suspect came with holes in their story. Some alibis checked out, others couldn't be verified, but without bodies or crime scene evidence, nothing was strong enough for prosecution. Theories swirled. Had the women been abducted by a serial predator like Cox? Had they been lured away by someone they trusted? Or had they been in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing paths with a stranger who saw an opportunity? Each possibility was terrifying, and each remained unproven. From the very beginning, the disappearance of 3 women at once was too shocking for the press to ignore. Local stations in Springfield covered every press conference, every update from police, and every emotional plea from the families. But it wasn't long before the story spread beyond Missouri. By midsummer, the Springfield Three were appearing on regional newspapers, nightly news broadcasts, and eventually national television. Programs like America's Most Wanted ran segments on the case, replaying the haunting facts. 3 women, 3 cars left behind, no sign of a struggle. Viewers across the country were stunned. For the relatives, the constant spotlight was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought attention that could lead to tips. On the other, it forced them to live out their grief in public. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, became the most visible advocate. Tireless and determined, she gave interviews, organized searches, and begged for information. Her steady voice became a symbol of the family's fight for answers. Friends and neighbors of Cheryl and Susie also spoke to reporters, painting pictures of a loving mother and a vibrant daughter who had no reason to vanish voluntarily. Every time the families appeared on TV, the phone lines at the police station lit up with new tips. But just as quickly, those leads would fizzle out. The case had a chilling effect on Springfield. Parents who once let their kids roam freely now insisted they stay close. Women who had felt safe walking at night began locking doors and carrying pepper spray. Churches held vigils, candles flickering in the summer air as prayers were whispered for Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy. Posters with their photos, smiling faces frozen in time, covered bulletin boards, telephone poles, and grocery store windows. The disappearance became not just a crime story, but a community trauma. Springfield was no longer just another Midwestern city. It was a place where something unthinkable had happened, and where answers never came. Even as months passed and the national spotlight dimmed, local coverage never fully disappeared. Journalists returned on anniversaries, marking each passing year without resolution. The women's faces appeared again and again on the evening news, reminders of a nightmare without closure. For Springfield, the case became a kind of wound that never healed, an open question that hovered over the city for decades. In the years following 1992, the Springfield Police Department never closed the case. Detectives came and went, but the file grew thicker with each passing year. Tips continued to arrive, some credible, many outlandish. At times, police launched major excavations based on new leads. In the early 2000s, investigators received information about bodies possibly buried in cement at a local hospital's parking garage. Ground-penetrating radar even indicated suspicious anomalies beneath the concrete. but digging was never authorized. Officials argued that the evidence wasn't strong enough to justify tearing apart an active structure. To this day, many residents believe the women may rest there, beneath layers of concrete, their secret entombed forever. Other leads took investigators to rural properties, abandoned wells, and even across state lines. Each time, hope surged, only to collapse when nothing was found. As years turned into decades, the Springfield Three case became one of the nation's most haunting cold cases. Despite periodic flurries of media attention, the investigation stagnated. Without new evidence, the puzzle remained unsolvable. For the families, time did not heal. Janice McCall continued to speak publicly, keeping her daughter's memory alive. She pushed for new technology, hoping advances in forensics might one day uncover what the investigators of 1992 could not. The Levitt and Streeter families, too, held on to fading hope. But without answers, grief became a permanent companion. 3 women, 3 lives interrupted, a city forever changed, the Springfield. 3 remain a symbol of how fragile safety can be. Their cases studied in criminal justice courses, discussed in true crime forums, and remembered in annual vigils. They are gone, but never forgotten. And yet, after more than 30 years, the central questions remain. Who took Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy? Why was there no trace? And most haunting of all, where are they now? The silence surrounding the Springfield Three is deafening. Until the truth is revealed, Springfield will never be free of its darkest mystery. Among the countless tips investigators received, one stood out more than any other: the claim that the Springfield Three were buried beneath the concrete of a hospital parking garage. In the early 2000s, a tipster came forward insisting that the women's bodies had been disposed of during the garage's construction. Investigators used ground-penetrating radar, which revealed 3 distinct anomalies beneath the surface, shapes roughly the size of human graves. The discovery ignited a storm of speculation. Newspapers printed bold headlines, television stations interviewed engineers and forensic experts, and Springfield residents gathered at the site, whispering that the mystery was about to be solved. But the dig never happened. Officials argued that the anomalies could be anything: construction debris, voids in the concrete, or unrelated soil disturbances. Tearing apart the garage, they said, would be expensive and potentially fruitless. For the families, it was devastating. They were left to wonder, had the answers been just a few feet below the city all along? Through the 2000s and 2010s, the case entered the realm of cold case files, but it was never forgotten. Springfield police periodically reassigned new detectives, hoping fresh eyes might spot something overlooked. Advances in forensic science gave renewed hope. DNA testing, which had barely been in use in 1992, now promised answers from even the smallest trace. But without physical evidence, no crime scene, no bodies, there was nothing to test. Investigators traveled to prisons to re-interview Robert Craig Cox and other possible suspects. Each time, they came away with little more than frustration. Cox, in particular, seemed to relish dangling cryptic hints, repeating that the women were dead but refusing to explain how he knew. For the families, every passing year was a bitter reminder that justice remained out of reach. Decades later, the disappearance of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy continues to cast a shadow over Springfield. Every year, candlelight vigils are held in their memory. Churches ring bells, families gather to pray, and the women's photographs are placed on display. Reminders of 3 lives frozen in time. The case also changed Springfield itself. Residents who once left doors unlocked began installing deadbolts and alarms. Parents raised their children with sharper warnings. Don't talk to strangers. Always let someone know where you are. The Springfield Three became a cautionary tale, passed from one generation to the next. Today, true crime researchers, podcasters, and documentarians revisit the story, hoping fresh attention might spark a breakthrough. Yet the central mystery remains. 3 women vanished from a quiet home in the middle of the night. No struggle, no ransom, no answers. For over 30 years, their names, Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, have haunted Missouri and beyond. Perhaps one day, a confession will surface, or technology will reveal what has been hidden for decades. Until then, Springfield lives with a chilling truth. Sometimes the most terrifying mysteries leave no trace at all. Every secret waits to be revealed. Every silence that carries an echo, every story is waiting to be told. This was her secret. What about yours? What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice matters. Subscribe and step into the echoes of truth.